Om Gyanatimirandasya Gyananjala Shalakaya Chakshur Umlitamina Tasmai Shigurave Namaha Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasad Dare Srimati Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravanam Sharine Nivasasya Prasacharya Satarine Ukam Karoti Vachalam Pangun Lahyaya Dekrim Yakripa Tavham Bande Shigaram Dinitaranam. So, probably some of you know, or all of you know, thank you, that today is the disappearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So I thought maybe I'd speak a little bit. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was born in 1874 on the 6th of February at 3:30 in the afternoon. And he was the son of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, one of our great acharyas, and Bhagavati was his mother's name. He was born in Jagannath Puri, and when he was born, his umbilical cord was wrapped around his torso like a Brahman thread. So it was a very auspicious sign, because actually Bhaktivinoda, as we know, he had preached a lot, and he had defeated many of the different deviant groups, like the Nitya Vamshas and the Bowls and different groups that after Lord Chaitanya had left, and all the different associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Goswamis and so forth, there were many deviant groups, 13 in all, that presented themselves as Vaishnava but had many deviant ideas about what Vaishnavism was, and therefore, unfortunately, Vaishnavism at that time, or Krishna consciousness, was relegated to really degraded people and low-class people, and people who couldn't really accomplish much in life, and therefore they would become kind of sadhus, and just on the pretext of being Vaishnavas, they could just beg from society. And so the situation was very dire. Not much respect was given to the Vaishnavas and so forth. And of course, Bhaktivinoda worked tirelessly to present Krishna consciousness in a bona fide way, and he was a magistrate in Jagannath Puri. He was very well respected. And of course the British were ruling at the time, but even the British were very impressed by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And they definitely wanted to keep him in their governmental posts, in his governmental posts. And even when he ended up going to, maybe I can, if in case I forget something or I misquote something or whatever. Thank you. So if you go to Mayapur, and you cross the Saraswati or Jalangi, and you'll see that there's the house of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and there's a very narrow train tracks that are there, and those train tracks were especially built for Bhaktivinoda Thakur, so he could take the train. The British made this special arrangement for him to have his little train that he could go to work. They didn't want to lose him, so he was very, very important, and he would what would take someone all day to accomplish, he would do it in half a day, and then the rest of the day he would do his bhajans and write his books and so forth. But he was feeling that something more had to be done, so he prayed to Lord Krishna to send him someone from his qualified devotee servants in Golok Vrindavan. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was born. And at birth he was called Bhagavati, not Bhagavati, sorry, I forget now. What was his name at birth? Memory's getting so short in Kali Yuga. Bimala Prasad. That was his name, Bimala Prasad Datta. The family Bhaktivinoda, they were known as, family name was Datta. So Bimala Prasad was his name. And which is interesting is that if you read Chaitanya Charita from Lokanath Das Goswami, Lochan Das, he wrote this book, Chaitanya Charita. And in there he has a description about Narada Muni. We know Narada Muni travels in many places and so forth. So one time Narada Muni was serving Lakshmi Devi very faithfully, and after Lakshmi Devi was so pleased, she offered to give him a benediction. So Narada Muni requested that she offer him some of the Mahaprasad that she receives from her husband, from Narayan, Vishnu. Of course, not a little bit prior to that, Lord Vishnu had told her, never share this prasadam, never tell anybody, never, let anyone take this prasadam. So when Narada Muni requested that, she was really disturbed, and she said, I can't give you that. Ask me something else, but I can't offer you this. But he insisted that you promised, and you have to keep your word. So finally she went to see Lord Narayan, and he finally said, okay, you can give it to Narada. So he got some prasadam, and he was so much in ecstasy, he started dancing and chanting, and then he wanted to share it with someone, so he went to see Lord Shiva. And he wanted to express the ecstasy that he had felt by tasting this prasadam. So Lord Shiva, when he saw him, he said, wow, normally you're in bliss, but now I see you're even more in bliss than you normally are. What happened? So Narada explained what he had. So Lord Shiva wanted some of that prasadam, but Narada said, I ate it, I don't have any. But apparently he had a little bit stuck in his fingers, so he was able to share that with Lord Shiva. And Lord Shiva, in ecstasy, started dancing, and dancing so much that everyone else, all the demigods, thought that this is the dance of devastation. When Lord Shiva was about to destroy the universe, he dances and everything gets destroyed. So they were really fearful what's going on. And he was dancing so wildly, they feared approaching him, so they went to see Parvati, Durga, his wife, and that's what's going on. So she said, I don't know, I'll go and see. So she went to see Lord Shiva, and she calmed him down and said, what's happening? The whole universe is disturbed. So he expressed how he had received some Mahaprasadam from Lord Vishnu, and he was so much in ecstasy. So she said, okay, so you should share. I'm your better half, so whatever you get, you've vowed to share it with me. He said, but I don't have any. So she was really upset. And he definitely didn't have any. He didn't have any. He only had a little morsel and he ate it. So being so disturbed that she took a vow that if she ever got prasadam, Mahaprasadam, she would share it with everyone, even the dogs. And if you go to Jagannath temple, there is that deity of Bimala that is there. And whenever the Jagannath temple prasadam, when the offering is done to Lord Jagannath, that offering after that goes to Bimala. She receives that, and then it's distributed to everyone else. So it's interesting how Bhaktivinoda named his son Bimala Prasad, the one who would distribute Krishna consciousness all over the world, that he had that desire. And when he was very young, the Jagannath Rath Yatra took place, and of course Bhaktivinoda's house was very close to the Jagannath temple on the Grand Road. So the cart stopped there and was stuck for several days. And Bhagavati, because she was of course the wife of a prominent person in Puri, she went on top of the cart and she offered her child to Lord Jagannath, and then a garland fell on the boy, indicating blessings, a special event. So it was taken that this boy was specially blessed by Lord Jagannath. And of course when he was 7 years old, he already memorized the whole Bhagavad Gita and he could preach from it. He was known as a very erudite scholar. Anything he would read, he would remember. And he would read a lot of the books. This is one of the reasons why it's difficult to read what Bhaktisiddhanta, because of course he would join words, Godhead, he would join some words to create an idea. But also he read all the books of his father, which were like law books. So he was very scholarly, even in English language. And he grew up, of course, so he didn't stay long in Jagannath Puri, ended up going to Bengal and was raised there. And he became a very scholarly person. He wrote the Surya Siddhanta, which was the very complicated astrological book. Astrology, not astrology, but astronomy. And he got the title of Siddha Saraswati. And eventually there was this guru that Gorkishore Das Babaji that associated much with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So he was recommended to take initiation from Gorkishore Das Babaji. And when he went to take initiation, he requested, and Gorkashore said, I'll think about it. And then next time when he met him, he said, well, I'll have to ask Mahaprabhu, Lord Chaitanya. Then he went back and asked again, and he said, well, I forgot to ask Mahaprabhu. So more and more, Bhaktisiddhanta was becoming more and more despondent, more and more discouraged. So finally, he went to see again Gorkashore Das Babaji, and he told him, you have to accept me, otherwise what's the point of my existence? And he felt so rejected that finally Gorkashore felt obliged to accept him. But Gorkashore didn't really want to take any disciples. He only took one or two disciples. So he gave him the name Varshabha Navi Devi Tayita Das, which is one of the names of Radharani. And Bhaktisiddhanta, of course, at one point he was working, and he, of course, going to school and so forth, but he dropped all that. He was thinking that if I get too educated, I'll be kind of forced to get married. So if I'm seen as someone who's not, educated, I can't be a provider, therefore no one will force me to get married. And so that was his idea. And he eventually, of course, started the Gaudiya Math mission based on the desire that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had. Even prior to that, when he was, I think maybe around 17 years old, there was a whole debate that started off that only those who were born in Brahmin family could do worship of Shalagram Shila, and who really considered, upper class. So there was a whole debate about that, and Bhaktivinoda was very disturbed, and he wanted to go, but he was feeling ill. So Bhaktisiddhanta went there on the request of Bhaktivinoda, and he started, first day he started praising the Brahmins like anything. The Brahmins were even surprised that there were verses that they didn't even know themselves, praising the Brahmins, so they were so happy. But then the next day he started praising the Vaishnavas and explaining how the Vaishnavas are superior to the Brahmins. And that's always been the thing. But by that preaching of Bhaktivinoda, and actually if you look on the altar, you'll never see Bhaktivinoda wearing a Brahmin thread or Gorkashore Das Babaji. And Bhaktivinoda would preach against that because you have this two-piece thread, you think you're so exalted, so he encouraged people to take that Brahmin thread away. And Bhaktisiddhanta did the opposite. He started giving Brahmin thread, but to people who were not born in Brahmin family, and that created quite a commotion. And a lot of the Brahmins and so forth were complaining. And of course, we know at one point they even bribed the police, and they were going to do something, kill Bhaktisiddhanta. And the police said, no, we sometimes take bribe, but not when it's sadhus, not with insanely persons. We don't want to take that kind of karma. So they warned Bhaktisiddhanta about that. So at that occasion where there was this whole dispute, Bhaktisiddhanta defeated these Brahmins, and everyone went and touched his feet, and everyone was so happy and so forth. And he became more and more renowned as a very big scholar. And there are many things, of course, that Bhaktisiddhanta did that we in ISKCON are very kind of recipients of that, because he opened the door to Krishna consciousness for us to be accepted, even in India. Of course, when Srila Prabhupada, our Prabhupada, started the Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan, it was known as the English Mandir. There was just English, white people, and some of them didn't really accept us to be really so serious. But now, after so many years, practically if you go anywhere in India, you can go to any temple and you'll be accepted outside of a few. Jagannath Puri, of course, it's very difficult, the Gundicha, but most every other temple, you go all over India. Even there's a South Indian temple in Vrindavan that we weren't allowed to go in for many, many years. They're very, very strict. They don't let Westerners go, but now they let the devotees go and see the deities because of our kirtan, our standard, our preaching, our book distribution, and so forth. And Bhaktisiddhanta was very much into preaching. He was quite a revolutionary mentality at the time, because for most sadhus in those days, the model or the example of what a sadhu does is, it was the Goswamis. They would go, most of them would go to Vrindavan and go to Radhakund or Govardhan and those areas and stay there and do their bhajans. But Bhaktisiddhanta was sending his disciples to Calcutta, to Bombay, to Delhi, and these were like strong posts of the British. And even some of his disciples were wondering, well, why is he doing that, So it's been described that Bhaktisiddhanta had the mind of just like Napoleon. Napoleon, he was quite different in his way of attacking. Normally, when you attack, they had phalanx and a certain strategy, and you would try to find the weak point of the opposite party, and then you would attack there because that's the weak point. But Napoleon did the opposite. He would find where is the strong point, and he would attack there. And once that strong point was, well, all the weak point was finished, because they had no strength anymore. He had defeated the strongest point of the army. So Bhaktisiddhanta was like that. He wanted his disciples to go to where the hub of Maya, Calcutta, Delhi, places like that, and go there and defeat and preach Krishna consciousness there, not just send people to Radhakund and places like that. So some of his disciples had a hard time, and he started, they had a vehicle, they had a car that Bhaktisiddhanta would ride in, and that was unheard of. Sadhus using modern facility, even wearing shoes or anything like that. The sadhu just walks barefoot and doesn't use any modern thing. But Bhaktisiddhanta was the opposite. He was in the mood of yukta vairagya. Whatever can be used for Krishna should be used for Krishna. And he felt that actually all these things should be used by the devotees because they're worshipping Krishna. He started requesting some of his, not all, but some of his disciples to dress very nicely, very opulently, nice dhoti, not things that are kind of neglected or ripped, because people were not respecting, okay, so here's some beggar, here's a couple of rupees, and go buy yourself another dhoti kind of thing. But Bhaktisiddhanta wanted his disciples to be respected in society, that we're not collecting on our behalf, we're not beggars in that sense. We're representatives of Krishna, and it's your business and to your advantage to give to Krishna. And you'll benefit from that. It's not our need, So that was a lot of his preaching was like that. Also, the printing press, of course, he called it the Brihat Mridanga, the greater Mridanga. The Mridanga can make a little bit of noise here and there, but the book can go all over the world. So he started a massive book distribution, publications, and so forth and so on, and established about 60 temples around the world. Well, not around the world, but India mostly. Maybe a little center in London. But at the same time, he also, for us, we know Prabhupada, our Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta, met Bhaktisiddhanta in 1922. His friend kind of encouraged him to go and see Bhaktisiddhanta. Prabhupada was very reluctant because he had seen so many sadhus. His father would have practically some kind of sadhu or someone every evening, eating with them and so forth. And so he had seen a lot of these sadhus, so he wasn't very impressed. But when he met Bhaktisiddhanta, he was very, very impressed. He could understand, here's a person who's got Lord Chaitanya's mission, properly understood, and he can deliver that message. And of course, he was a follower of Gandhi, so he put some argument that if we're a nation, if you're a country that's been subjugated by the British, if we're under the British rule, who will respect us? We should first of all separate ourselves and eliminate ourselves from the British, and then we can stand our own. And Bhaktisiddhanta defeated him by saying, no, Krishna consciousness is so important that it cannot wait for these material considerations. So Prabhupada he said, I was very pleased to be defeated by him. And eventually, 1933, Prabhupada was initiated by Bhaktisiddhanta, and Bhaktisiddhanta left in 1936, and Prabhupada wrote them just earlier, and that expressing that you have so many disciples, some of them are sannyasis, they're brahmacharis, they're doing direct service. I'm a grihastha, I'm a little entangled in family life, I can't render you much service. And Bhaktisiddhanta again reiterated, re-explained first instruction he had given him in the very beginning when he saw him in 1922, that you should preach to the English-speaking world, that this will be good for you and for them. So again, he received that instruction, that just preach to the Western world, and that encouraged Prabhupada to come to New York and established ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Of course, there are many other things. There's so many books about Bhaktisiddhanta. There was several magazines that he had, Sajjana Toshani, and that was established by his father, Bhaktivinod, and eventually became the Harmonists. And one time, one of these journals were daily journals that were written every day. And some reporters came to interview Bhaktisiddhanta, and they were surprised, He was explaining, we have temples, we're doing this, we're doing that, we have daily magazine. It's a daily magazine. What do you talk about? I mean, about God every day? You've got something to say. So Bhaktisiddhanta said, well, this material world is only 1/4 of the spiritual world, so if you can, and the whole planet, there's so many countries, and then there's so many cities, and then Calcutta is one little city amongst the world, right? And you've got 2-3 newspapers going on here in Calcutta. So if you can write newspaper about a little city like Calcutta, certainly we can write a daily newspaper about Vaikuntha. So that was his answer. And another time, some journalists were asking Bhaktisiddhanta, well, where are you going to get the money? He had all these big plans, where are you going to get that's always a question, right? Where does your money come from? How do you guys survive? I don't see anybody working. So Bhaktisiddhanta said, well, we will take 1 brick from Vaikuntha, and that should be sufficient. Imagine answering like that. I mean, you got to be on such a high Krishna consciousness level that I'll take just 1 brick from Vaikuntha. Another time he wrote to one of his disciples and telling him how I have taken on such a difficult task of having to criticize others. I don't know why you should take on that task. But that's the position of the guru, right? He has to correct the disciples, so he has to constantly correct them and criticize them and tell them for their own good. So he was explaining to one disciple, and I don't know, this is a difficult task, I don't know why you should, because Bhaktisiddhanta was very, he had a unique position where, although he was a spiritual master and so forth, he was always expressing that he was their servant simultaneously, as much as he was, of course, the guru, but he saw that his position was simply to serve others who came to him. And he started organizing big parikrams all over Vrindavan and so forth, and he started the diorams. He said that a diagram is worth 1,000 words. When people see the pastimes carved up in diorams, then people have a much more powerful vision than just reading. So he started that. And the parikrams going around Vrindavan, of course, because he had initiated so many people that were considered low class, and many of the times that he went to Vrindavan, everyone would close their doors. They wouldn't let him in. One of the only temples that did let him was the Radharaman temple. They've always been very close to us, Gaudiya Vaishnavas. When he went to Radhakund, because he was such a scholar, all the Babajis and all the sadhus came to hear from him, thinking, okay, he's going to preach this very high, katha and all these about the rasa dance and all that. And Bhaktisiddhanta started preaching about vachovegam, controlling the senses. And they were, what's this all about? This, this is for neophytes, the beginners, ABCs of spiritual life. We didn't come to hear this. So they were quite disappointed. But Bhaktisiddhanta never felt that such high katha was meant for everybody. That it would just cheapen and maybe create sahajas. People take Krishna consciousness very cheaply. One time there was a kind of an emergency meeting. Many of his leaders, sannyasis, wanted to meet with Bhaktisiddhanta, and there was some urgency. So he met with all of them, and they started expressing that they've been part of the Gaudiya Math for so many years, and they were sannyasis and so forth, and many of them felt that maybe there was something wrong, that they weren't feeling that they were making the spiritual progress, that they felt they should. And Bhaktisiddhanta was like relieved, oh, this is the problem, good. I thought you were going to say you're all becoming so advanced. So now that you're thinking, that's a good position to have, to not think yourself so advanced. So Bhaktisiddhanta was was happy to hear them complain in that way. And of course he told Srila Prabhupada that he had received the temple in Bagh Bazar, and that it was a very opulent place with a lot of marble apparently, and the senior men were fighting who would get the best room, and I'm senior to you, I should have this room, and there was some fighting. So Bhaktisiddhanta told Prabhupada at Radhakund that if you ever get money, print books. He said, I would have sold the marble to print books. It would have been better than all this fighting. So of course Prabhupada took that instruction very much to heart, and he started the Back to Godhead magazine, although he hardly had any money. And when he came to America, immediately he started, wanting to print so many books and pushing the devotees to print books and get behind doing the books and so forth and distributing. And because of that, ISKCON has distributed so many books around the world. But Prabhupada never forgot that instruction that he should do that. Spread Krishna consciousness that way through book distribution. That people by reading they would become transformed. So it's nice to read about Bhaktisiddhanta and a little bit of our history and a little bit the achievement that Bhaktivinoda Thakur did and Bhaktisiddhanta and so forth. So I don't know, what time does the class end?
6:30.
6:30, okay. So I don't know if there's any question on this topic. If not, then maybe I'll get into a little Bhagavad Gita. So I thought that was by Bhaktivinoda, the life and teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Yeah, he sent that to McGill, but a few apparently other universities, but McGill received one of that book. Yeah. Yeah, Bhaktivinoda was also in correspondence with several scholars in America and so forth at the time, and of course Bhaktisiddhanta met many scholars, different persons, and had conversations and British, and he was quite unique, and also, as I said, he was really there was some complaint that Westerners and the British weren't so inclined. So Bhaktisiddhanta even told them that you could serve non-veg. You could have an area where they're serving meat and letting them smoke and drink coffee, and a place where they would be vegetarian. And if this is what was required for them to come to our temple and associate with us, that he was prepared to do that. Of course, it never really took place. and some of them complained. He said, but we're the mind of the Vaikuntha. Let us go to hell, but let them be saved. So he had quite an extreme vision on things. Not something we can imitate, but he was prepared to go. And there was an occasion where some people were going to donate some land or a temple or so forth, and he was sending out 2 brahmacharis, and it was the day of Janmashtami, and they were fasting. Bhaktisiddhanta told them, no, you have to eat. He said, well, no, Maharaj, it's Janmashtami, we're fasting till midnight. He said, no, now you're going to a mission, you have to be stout and strong, you can't be weakened in your, because you're fasting, you have to have full vitality to take the train, go there, negotiate all this. So he, for a higher purpose, he was prepared to, allowed that to take place, even told them to do it. So it's a little bit like Govinda. We have the story of Lord Chaitanya, how Govinda was a servant of Lord Chaitanya, and one day Lord Chaitanya fell asleep in the doorway, and so Govinda came, and he was used to preparing Lord Chaitanya's lunch and things. So he stepped over Lord Chaitanya and went in and prepared everything, but then he was stuck inside. So a couple hours later, when Lord Chaitanya woke up, he saw him and said, what are you doing, Govinda? It's past your lunchtime and all this. I said, well, what could I do? I couldn't step over you. He said, yeah, but how did you get in? Well, I stepped over you. So why didn't you step again over me? He said, no, because stepping over you first was to render service to you. But now I wasn't going to step over you to render service to myself, so I'm waiting for you to to wake up, and now I can go. So for the service of the Lord, sometimes the devotees can take great risks, and we see our Srila Prabhupada took so much risk of coming to the West and so forth, and many of his godbrothers were not prepared to do that, and often they would discuss among themselves because they had the instruction of Bhaktisiddhanta to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world, but they kind of look at each other, who's going to go and do that? You're going to do it? No. No. It's like, and they were all getting old and stuff, and no one saw themselves doing something like that, And and there was Prabhupada's godbrother Krishnadas Babaji. He told us this story that when Prabhupada was taking sannyas at the Keshava Gaudiya Math temple in Mathura, Keshava Maharaj was his sannyas godbrother. Actually, Prabhupada had several dreams of Bhaktisiddhanta wanting him to take sannyas, and he said, I was horrified, to take sannyas. I never saw myself qualified to do this. But Keshava Maharaj told him that if you don't take sannyas, your preaching will be difficult because people won't take you seriously. So he was taking sannyas there, and the one performing the sacrifice, as we know, we've been to fire sacrifice, we chant different mantras and so forth and so on. And Krishnadas Babaji, he was always chanting Hare Krishna, So he was chanting, to himself, but it was loud enough that people could hear. So finally the priest told him, okay, stop now. Now we're going to chant these prayers, And Prabhupada went to him and he was sitting in the arena, but he went to him like that, keep going, This is all secondary. The mantra is more important. And he said, I marked your Prabhupada that he would be the one who would spread Krishna consciousness all over the world because he had that faith in the holy name. So, little pastimes like that. So we're from a very rich history, very rich culture. We're very fortunate. So I thought maybe I'd read a little verse from, let's see, Bhagavad Gita here. I took a few notes, try to make it interesting. So this is the 7th chapter, Knowledge of the Absolute, text 16, in which Krishna expresses that 4 kinds of people come to him. Chaturvida bhajanti mam, jnana sukrito juna, arto jigyasur artarti, jnanicha bharatarshaba. O best amongst the Bharatas, 4 kinds of pious men begin to render devotional service unto me: the distress, the desire of wealth, the inquisitive, and who is searching for knowledge of the Absolute. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Unlike the miscreants, these are adherents to the regulated principles of the scriptures, and they are called sukritina, or those who obey the rules and regulations of the scriptures, the moral and social laws, and are more or less devoted to the Supreme Lord. Out of these there are 4 classes of men: those who are sometimes distressed, those who are in need of money, those sometimes inquisitive, and those who are sometimes searching after knowledge of the Absolute. These persons come to the Supreme Lord for devotional service under different conditions. They are not pure devotees because they have some aspiration to fulfill in exchange for devotional service. Pure devotional service is without aspiration and without desire for material profit. The Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.1.11 defines pure devotional service as anyabhilasdita sunyam jnana karma anavritam anukulya Krishna silanam bhakti ruchyate. One should render transcendental loving service to the Supreme Lord Krishna favorably and without desire for material profit or gain through fruitive activities or philosophical speculation. That is called pure devotional service. When these 4 kinds of persons come to the Supreme Lord for devotional service and are completely purified by the association of pure devotees, they also become pure devotees. As far as the miscreants are concerned, for them devotional service is very difficult because their lives are selfish, irregular, and without spiritual goals. But even some of them, by chance, when they come in contact with a pure devotee, they also become pure devotees. Those who are always busy with fruitive activities come to the Lord in material distress, and at that time associate with pure devotees and become, in their distress, devotees of the Lord. Those who are simply frustrated also come sometimes and associate with the pure devotees and become inquisitive to know about God. Similarly, when the dry philosophers are frustrated in every field of knowledge, they sometimes want to learn of God, and they come to the Supreme Lord to render devotional service and thus transcend knowledge of the impersonal Brahman and the localized Paramatma, and come to the personal conception of Godhead by the grace of the Supreme Lord or his pure devotee. On the whole, when the distressed, the inquisitive, the seeker of knowledge, and those who are in need of money are free from all material desires, and when they fully understand that material remuneration has nothing to do with spiritual improvement, fully understand that material renunciation, I should say. No, I'll take my glasses off. Well, yeah, remuneration. In other words, any profit from their activity. As long as such a purified stage is not attained, devotees in transcendental service of the Lord are tainted with fruitive activities, to search for mundane knowledge, etc. So one who has transcended all this before, one can come to the stage of pure devotional service. Best among the Bharat, 4 kinds of pious men begin to render devotional service unto me: the distressed, the desire of wealth, the inquisitive, and those who are searching for knowledge of the Absolute. So, generally speaking, that's what we have. We have people who are thinking that by approaching God, of course, as mentioned here, they're very pious. They're pious because at least they're approaching God. They're not. They've kind of given up to some extent the desire to prosper on their own, like the atheists. The atheists, they think by my own intelligence, by my abilities, by my good work, I will gain the enjoyment of this world. So the mentality is still there that they're trying to enjoy the material world, but they're approaching God, which is good. They're considered pious, but they're not considered necessarily devotees, and they're more like karma mishra bhakti or jnana mishra bhakti. They're looking either for fruitive gain or some kind of acquisition of material arrangement by which they can enjoy this world. And it is encouraged by Krishna, but to some extent, because they're considered pious, that they're coming to Krishna. But it's a very preliminary stage, because if their desires are not fulfilled properly, they may get frustrated with God and think, well, I've been praying to God, I've been doing all these things, and I didn't get the results I was aiming for, so, let me forget this and move on to something else. Or when they do get their material desire satisfied, they can again leave God because think, well, I don't need him anymore. I got what I wanted. I didn't come for God. I came for these things. I came for the fruits. Like many people, they're attracted to wealthy people or famous people, but not necessarily for that person. They're attracted for what that person represents. Just like we had the President Obama, everyone was around him, but now no one's around him, and they're all after Trump because he represents the power of the states. He's the president of the United States. So it's not always the person that people are attracted to, but it's what these people represent and what they can give. If I get close to that person, I may get some benefits from that person. Just like sometimes artists they imitate. The people imitating Elvis Presley or imitating the Beatles or imitating because they were famous. So by imitating them, I'll also become famous. But it's not, Krishna consciousness is not that. It's not that we're trying to get something out of Krishna. Actually, the pure devotee, they don't even want to recognize, they don't want to acknowledge that Krishna is God. They're not interested. That's our level of conception is the gopis, that they're not interested. Even Mother Yashoda, when she looked in Krishna's mouth when Krishna ate earth, and all the cowherd boys and Balaram said, yeah, Krishna's eating earth. So Mother Yashoda said, okay, let me see, And then when Krishna opened his mouth and she saw all the universal planets and the universes and everything, she became a little bit bewildered and thinking maybe this Krishna is a demigod or is a powerful person, or maybe he could even be God, and but then she said, okay, forget it, go and play. She didn't want to think of Krishna in that way because it interferes with their rasa with Krishna. If Krishna is God, then they have to have a different approach. And Krishna is not that attracted to people who have that desire. He may fulfill material ambitions and so forth, but he doesn't really reveal himself to those who have those. You give material opulence, give all these different things and so forth, but to reveal himself personally, it requires a different caliber of personality. And there's some nice other verses in the Gita that I was looking up, and that Krishna says, this is what a devotee understands. Aham sarvasya prabhavo matak sarvam pravartate iti madhva bhajanti mam buddha bhava samanvita. I am the source of all spiritual material world. Everything emanates from me. The wise who know this perfectly engage in my devotional service with all their hearts. So when one comes to that level, to understand that everything material and spiritual comes from Krishna, then that is a higher conception, because the pious person, he's just concerned with the material world. He wants everything. He wants paradise in the material world, and he thinks, okay, by praying to God, so it's like a good citizen. Good citizen, he pays his taxes. He's not necessarily concerned about the government, but he wants to be left alone. So he works, gets the enjoyment, and then he pays his dues to the government, and that way he's out of trouble. So a pious person is like that. Okay, I don't want to commit any sins. I don't want God's wrath, God's anger towards me. So okay, I'm just going to give a little bit of acknowledgement to Him, and then I can enjoy everything else, and I can be left alone. But there's no necessarily loving exchange. It's more like a material exchange where you have some goods. I've got money, I buy the goods, you give me the goods, and the business is over, right? And I don't see you anymore, you don't see me, I don't need you, you don't need me. And so it can be a little bit that kind of mood. Of course, as Prabhupada describes, that those persons associate with pure devotees or more advanced devotees, they can change their mindset, they can change their mentality, because the pure devotees can give them knowledge of okay, this is great, but there are higher levels to come to, there are higher perceptions. And as that person, through devotional service, makes a little advancement, he may start tasting a little something different. If the religious process doesn't cheat them, like in the Bhagavatam it says the Kotrava Dharma, the most religious process, they entice people that if you come and pray to God, you give your money, you'll get so many benefits, you'll get a nice wife, you'll get this, you'll get good health, and that way they supply the needs of the organization itself, because the organization has to survive. They may have temples, church, whatever, so they want to promote that so that people come and get so much benediction, and people, of course, are more inclined to that. So you get that kind of reciprocation from your congregation that we'll get so many material benedictions. So we'll give. If I give a couple of dollars, then I'll get maybe $1,000, in exchange. So it's a good deal. The deal is good, but it's just an exchange. But when you start preaching, it's just like one time Srila Prabhupada was taking the train, and it was a long journey. So at one point they stopped on a train station, and the devotees got out to get some fruit. Some of you have been to India, there's always some fruit stands and different things, and you can buy on the platform, the train platforms. So when the devotees came back in, some of the two Indian fellow noticed that there was Prabhupada, that saffron color in that compartment, so they jumped in the compartment and they offered their obeisances. And they were like kind of stunned that they had succeeded. They thought, well, we'll try this, but it may not work. We may get stopped by Prabhupada's servants. But they were able to go. So then Prabhupada said, yes. Oh, Swamiji, we've come to get your blessings. So Prabhupada said, oh, you want my blessings? So then he pointed to a sannyasis. He said, if you want my blessing, this is my blessings. Oh, no, Swamiji, that's not what we want. We have our family, we have our children, we just want some, and they were sharp, because most of the time the sadhu says, okay, here's your blessings, and the fellows go on their way, and they're very happy, they got the blessings, but this time Prabhupada questioned what kind of blessings you want. Do you want this kind of blessing? And no, that's not the one we want. We want material prosperity. We want to be able to enjoy this world. We want paradise here. Fool's paradise without God. They don't understand that the material world cannot be paradise because it's an absence of energy. It's like the darkness. It's dark outside. It's cold. Why? Because we're further away from the sun. The sun is set. And winter means the sun is further away from, the earth is turned in the direction that we're further away. So the absence of heat of the sun creates coldness and darkness, but that's not an energy. So this material world is dead. There's no energy here. The spirit soul makes it living. We imbibe in this body, and then this body moves and talks and so forth, but it's not the body doing that, it's the soul's desire to be in the body. As soon as the soul leaves, the body doesn't move, there's no consciousness in this body, and there's no energy here. We because we have desires, just like the city of Ottawa. Well, why is it here? Because people came from Europe, they had desire, started cutting trees, building things, and building a whole, because there was desire to do it. So it's all based on our desire. The Jiva comes to the material world because of his desire. He creates, seemingly animates this material energy, but the material energy in itself is dead. There's no reality to it. And that's why we say that it's a dream or an illusion. Not that it's not there, the energy is there, but it's an illusion in the sense that we're part of it, that we're somehow connected with this energy, which we never are. We are because we have a desire, and Krishna as a Paramatma within our heart makes that seeming connection, creates that illusion for us that we're connected, but we're actually like oil and water. You have oil and water, you can shake it all you want, but it never connects. Let it sit there and the oil will come back to the surface. So we're thinking by our illusion that we've connected with this material world and so many things are going on, but in reality, none of that is there. And because we're foolish, we think, okay, well, let's pray to God to keep me here in this material world. And we think that when things happen according to our expectation, we're getting God's blessings. But actually, that is not the blessings that devotees, real devotees want. Actually, when Sanatana Goswami met Lord Chaitanya, his questions was, Kayami, why am I suffering in this world? And what am I supposed to do to get out of this suffering, this material existence? He was saying, oh, this is great, this material world. He acknowledged that there's some suffering, and what is the reason that I'm suffering, and how can I get out of that suffering? So that was his inquiry. And Kunti, her consciousness was such that she was praying, may these calamities happen again and again, which is quite the opposite. Most people pray to God for things to happen and things to be great, but Kunti is praying that may these calamities, and we know, if we read the Mahabharata, so many calamities happened to the Pandavas, and Kunti was a victim of it all, and a witness to it all, because it was her sons, the Pandavas, and also Radeya, Karna, she was witness. That was her first son. So she's praying that may these calamities happen again and again, because why? When calamities happen, that's when we take shelter of you. That's when we feel that we need to take shelter. Other than that, when everything's fine, we think everything is great, and we tend to forget God. But when we're in a desperate situation, then we remember God, and we actually remember that we're all refugees. We have this term that people come from third world countries or war-stricken countries and all that, and they're refugees. What do we mean? They're refugees. It means that they're looking for a refuge. You're looking for a place, And for them, Canada may accept them, but there's conditions, that you surrender. All right. I mean, then probably some of you maybe were not born in Canada. Maybe you went through this and became Canadian citizens, and you had to take an oath of allegiance to Canada. and acknowledge that Canada has its own value system and its own mentality and so forth, and then you're going to abide by these, vision of what Canada represents, and kind of put your whatever where you were brought up aside. And now you're Canadian. You're no longer, you can keep some of your origins, but not that you're going to go against the principles of Canada. And Krishna does the same thing. He says, Sarvadhamam parityajya mamekam saranam vraja, that you should surrender to me. And sometimes people think, well, wow, what's this? God is so demanding that we should surrender. We don't realize that actually that surrender is for our benefit, because we're refugees. And if we surrender to God, then God can give us shelter. But if we're not surrendered to Him, how is He going to give us shelter? Just like a student, if he doesn't surrender to the teacher, if he thinks, oh, this guy's terrible, I don't like the way he teaches, this and that, then you can't benefit from the teacher. You have to surrender to that teacher. In other words, you have to become open to that teacher, that presentation, and then you'll learn. But if you don't, or if you have children, the parents are normal parents. I mean, there are many weird people, but I'm just saying ideally that, normal parents, they want what? They want the best for their children. But if the child rebels, takes off, parent still loves the child, but there's very little he can do, right? The kid's got his own ways, doing his own thing, so I'm trying to give some suggestion, but he thinks he knows it better than me. Okay, then. But the child, if he surrenders and works with the parent, then the parent can do so many things, and the child will benefit from that. But if the child doesn't recognize that, then it's very difficult. So for us, we think, okay, I've got my own plans, I got my own ideas, I don't need to surrender to God, this is too demanding. Then we don't benefit from what God can offer us. But if we recognize that simple adherence to Krishna's will, then we can benefit so tremendously. So devotee is actually very happy to surrender to Krishna. He feels that, okay, finally I've got shelter. I'm a refugee in the material world. I have no place to go. I mean, death is at my doorstep. Right? Any moment I can, but only who can give me shelter is Krishna from birth, death, disease, old age. Only Krishna can give me that shelter. And if I want that shelter, then I have to surrender. I have to take, guidance from Krishna. And that's what Arjuna tells in the Gita, Karpanya doshapato asabhava, he says that I'm bewildered here, Krishna. Shishyasteham sadimam twapampanam, that I want to take shishya, I want to take your guidance. You tell me what I should be doing. So this is the mindset of a devotee. He wants to know what Krishna is expecting of him. He's not thinking that I'll just pray to God and God will give me these things and that's the business. I pray, He gives, and and that's the relationship. But actually, the devotee wants to serve Krishna just because he knows by service to Krishna, Krishna will give him some shelter, give him some refugee, give him some protection, and that the material world is a place devoid of that shelter. Of course, the material world for Krishna, the material world, spiritual world is the same, in the sense that for him it's just like Hydro Ontario. They sell you electricity. What do you do with it? They don't particularly care. You may receive a high bill and say, okay, well, man, this bill is so expensive. What did I do? Okay, I was heating my swimming pool, or I had the AC on, and you're trying to figure out how you use that electricity. But for Hydro Ontario, you just used it. They don't particularly care. So for Krishna, it's like that. It's all His energy. It's like the sun. There's no darkness for the sun. Everywhere the sun goes, there's light. But for us, depending on how we relate to the sun, there can be darkness or light. So how we relate to Krishna, we can be in the spiritual or in the material world. And therefore, the devotee realizes that I need shelter, therefore that shelter is Krishna. I have to be with Krishna all the time. And the means of taking shelter to Krishna is to render service to Krishna. Because by rendering service to Krishna, I become dear to Krishna. So there are different, that consciousness is quite different for a devotee. The devotee is not trying to get something from Krishna, but he's trying to render service to Krishna. And by doing that, actually Krishna becomes indebted to his devotee. He becomes purchased. Just like Krishna said that Ye tamam prabhajante tam sadaiva bhajama yaham. As you surrender, I reward you accordingly. But we know the gopis, they surrendered to Krishna so much that Krishna said, I can't pay you back. I remain eternally a debtor. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta used to say, don't try to see God, but do something by which God will want to see you. And that's quite different, right? I mean, in the sense that, you could see the Prime Minister Trudeau somewhere, and okay, I saw Trudeau fine. But if he comes to your house, that's quite a different thing. You might see Trudeau or whoever, and some important person, but that doesn't mean he may acknowledge you. Right? You saw him, you're in the crowd, and you saw him fine, but it's not like he saw you and acknowledged you necessarily. But if he comes to your house, then there's a different thing. Now he's acknowledging. So devotee is like that. He's trying to, and we see how the Pandavas were so dear to Krishna that Krishna was serving them. He was driving the chariot for Arjuna. When Maharaj Yudhisthira did the Rajasuya sacrifice, Krishna was washing the feet. He became Krishna's messenger. Went to see Duryodhana and told him that Duryodhana, these are prince, you have to give them at least some villages, you can't neglect them to that extent. Krishna was always doing so many things. He protected them during Draupadi being stripped naked, when the Durvasa Muni went to the forest sent by Duryodhana, and they just finished eating, and Durvasa Muni came with all his disciples and there was nothing to eat. Krishna came and took a little morsel in the pot, and then Durvasa Muni at that time went to bathe, because that's the culture. You bathe and everything, then you honor food, you honor prasadam. So he went with all his disciples there. Duryodhana had sent, knowing that the Pandavas are in the forest, that if Durvasa Muni goes there and he's not fed, he becomes very angry easily, Durvasa Muni. We know with the story of Ambarish. So he'll curse the Pandavas, that'll be great. So that was his expectation. But Krishna appeared and he took a little morsel, and Durvasa Muni was full, all his disciples were full, so they thought, now if we go there we can't eat, then we'll become the one who's making the offense, so they just left. So the Pandavas were saved in that instance. So when you read like that, you see how Krishna at so many ways protected the Pandavas. When Duryodhana in the battle of Kurukshetra, after several days, he started complaining to Bhishma that you're supposed to be so powerful, but the Pandavas are still alive. How come you haven't killed any of them? Not even one. I was expecting that after a few days you would have killed at least one of them. Of course, this was very painful, Bhishma Dev, because his oath that he had taken an oath to be loyal to the kingdom and not the person who's representing the kingdom. In other words, Dhritarashtra, and he didn't agree with Dhritarashtra's mindset, and he didn't agree with Duryodhana, but he was obligated to take part in the battle of Kurukshetra because of his oath to allegiance to the kingdom. And so Duryodhana told him that, I think you have still some, warm spot in your heart for the Pandavas, and that's why they're still alive, because, of course, Bhishma always had a warm spot, always had a nice spot for the Pandavas. He thought that the Pandavas, especially Yudhisthira, were so virtuous, very religiously inclined, and Duryodhana was such a nasty person. And there was Duryodhana was so nasty that he insulted Vidura. Vidura left. That's why he wasn't there for the battle of Kurukshetra. He decided, okay, this is how it's going to be. I'll on the pretext of going on pilgrimage, he took off. He left. He didn't, because Duryodhana wouldn't take any of his suggestion, his advice. So then Bhishma told him, okay, here's 5 arrows. These 5 arrows are meant for the Pandavas. Tomorrow I'll shoot these arrows and I'll kill all the Pandavas. So of course Duryodhana was really happy. And Bhishma said, I'm giving them to you, so you know there's no trickery. You're going to give them back to me. So then meanwhile Krishna told Arjuna, Arjuna, Duryodhana's got these arrows. You should go and get them. Remember, he owes you a favor. Remember, he was in the forest, and he went there, and he got stuck with some gypsies, and they were going to, chop him up because he insulted the queen, the princess of the gypsies, and he was drunk, and you guys came and saved him, so he owes you a favor. So go and get these arrows. So next day, when Bhishma came and said, okay, well, give me the arrows. He said, I don't have these arrows. Well, what happened? Arjuna picked them up. So he knew that was Krishna's trick. Not only Krishna would know that. So he thought, okay, he made me break my promise, I'm going to make him break his promise. So the next day Bhishma fought so much against Arjuna that finally Krishna had to take up a wheel and charge Bhishma. And Bhishma was in ecstasy that Krishna had broken his promise to protect his devotee. Because he had promised, I won't fight. He told when the Krishna was lying down and Duryodhana came in the room, but Krishna was sleeping, so he put himself close to his head, and he figured when he wakes up, I'm going to speak to him and get a blessing. But then Arjuna came in. Arjuna stayed at Krishna's feet. So when Krishna woke up, he looked at Arjuna and said, Arjuna, you've come. Why? Well, I've come to get some blessing. And Duryodhana said, no, I was here first. I want the blessings first. So Krishna said, okay, what blessings do you want? He said, well, I don't want to disturb your relationship between you and Arjuna. I'll just take your army, the Vrishni army. So Krishna said, okay, you take them. And Arjuna was very happy that he got Krishna. So they had such a strong relationship like that. And Krishna, so Krishna in that sense was always protecting the Pandavas, always protecting Arjuna and so forth. So the devotee, he wants to be protected. He understands that protection, and therefore he prays to Krishna. He actually cries to Krishna, please let me take shelter of you. It's not an easy thing to take shelter of Krishna, because we're so conditioned, we're so convinced that this material energy will give us shelter, that the doctors will save us at the time of death. They'll give us some, they'll operate, they'll do this, they'll do so many things. But in reality, when it comes, to the bottom, is nothing can save us except Krishna. So devotee, he wants to develop that conviction by developing his relationship with Krishna, where he has full faith that, and we see the Pandavas, they never had any other plan, they had never had any other mindset, that just always thinking of Krishna and always depending on Krishna and always, praying to Krishna. And actually, many times they didn't even pray to Krishna for protection. Krishna was just there to protect them. So at the same time, a devotee knows that Krishna will protect him, but he's not praying to Krishna that, please come and become my servant. Whatever, like Lord Chaitanya said, you can embrace me or handle me roughly, you can, I can go to heaven, I can go to hell. One time devotees asked Prabhupada, said, Prabhupada, we don't mind where we're going to go, we're prepared to go to hell to preach. Prabhupada said, yeah, that's nice, but you should want to go back to the spiritual world, because this material world is such a nasty place. There's no guarantee, and he would often mention the Titanic, how the Titanic was such the best boat of its time, but it sank on the first voyage. So he said, even on the royal roads, you can be driving a Mercedes, there still can be accidents. So this material world is such a nasty place that we should want to get out and go back to the spiritual world. But it's a nice sentiment to have, but that we want to stay here and save everybody and so forth, but we should save ourselves. So a devotee in that sense, he has a whole different, we should, try to have a different mindset, that we're not serving Krishna just to get some material satisfaction, like this verse is mentioning, that people who come out of, and we see so many people coming to our doors in ISKCON, and they're chanting and they're doing so many things, and then after a while they disappear, because the reason for coming was not very strong. It was just some material, temporary misery in the material world, trying to take shelter of God, and but then as soon as situation change, they found their girlfriend or this or that, or they found a job, then they finish with Krishna. So we have to be careful, and we have to analyze ourselves. What's my motivation for coming to Krishna? And if that's where I'm at, then I have to try to associate with devotees who will help me come to a higher platform, through the process of Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, but through association of devotees who are on more mature platform of God consciousness. And then, as Prabhupada mentions, all these different persons, by associating with pure devotee, can become pure devotees themselves. And what is a pure devotee? Well, a pure devotee is just someone who wants to please Krishna. He has no personal ambition, personal plan. Nadanam janamna sundarim kavitam that no material, no desire for fame, no desire for women, no desire for wealth, no desire for any of these things. Of course, that doesn't mean that devotees should not have these things. Sometimes we may misunderstand that in bhakti there's an element of renunciation, but the devotee's renunciation is not that he gives it up necessarily. He may give it up if it's a distraction, and that attachment is so strong that it inhibits his ability to serve. But the devotee's renunciation is that he uses everything, Yukta Vairagya uses everything in Krishna's service. So whatever he has, he recognizes that this is Krishna, belongs to Krishna, and it's meant for Krishna's service, and therefore let me use it in his service. But sometimes if we're neophyte or conditioned, then we become enamored by the things that we may possess. So then it's better to get detached from it, to give it up, or at least try to regulate ourselves in such a way that we gradually progress spiritually. But a devotee can have anything. Not that he's looking for these things, but if Krishna supplies these things, then he doesn't necessarily reject them, but he utilizes them because they all belong to Krishna. So he realizes that if this belongs to Krishna, like I was saying earlier, Bhaktisiddhanta, he would ride in cars and he would, have different things that he would do. And we see how Srila Prabhupada started using many things when he came. Of course, in the beginning he took a boat and came here to Jaliduta, but then he started taking planes, flew back. When he had his third heart attack, he flew back to India, and he flew around the world so many times, and he had a dictaphone machine, and so many things that we started using, and printing press. Previously in Lord Chaitanya's time, they would just write everything on palm leaves by hand. But imagine if we had to copy the Gita and all the books by hand, it'd be very difficult. So we utilize all these things, but if we become enamored by those things, if we become impressed by those things, and we lose sight of what our real goal is, then it can be very detrimental. So that we have to gauge ourselves, and we have to gauge it sometimes by the advice of others, that some may guide us and tell us, well, this may not be the best thing to do, or this may not be, the best idea, or so all these different things we have to take into consideration. But so this is a little bit about this verse. So I don't know if there's any comments or comments, questions. Yes, Ramsa.
We're discarding this mentality that we go to God for something, and we give an example that we go usually for what not necessarily for the person, but for the position has to offer, and the President of the United States can offer this and so on. Could you explain a little bit what's the difference between worshipping or going for the things to Krishna and to demigods? Is there a difference, or it doesn't matter?
Well, there's a difference. First of all, Krishna says, "Kamasta sterete jnana prapadyantina devata," that those who worship the demigods are fools. So, and that's why he has, there's the pastime of Krishna going to see not him directly, but the cowherd boys were hungry. The Brahmins were doing a big sacrifice, and he told them, "No, don't go there. They won't. Don't. At least if you go, don't mention my name. They won't give anything." And they went there, and the Brahmins, told them, "Hey, you're contaminating. You're lusting over the offering. Get out of here." And they came back empty-handed, a little disappointed. Krishna said, "Okay, go see their wives." And the wives gave so much. So that pastime is a little bit showing how. And then later the Brahmins, they regretted their mindset, that they were so wrapped up in their thing and worshipping the demigods and so forth. So that pastime reveals how you should be approaching Krishna rather than the demigods. And one of the reasons for this is that the demigods will give you material satisfaction, but there won't be a process of purification. You won't get out of your mentality. You'll just be rewarded, and you'll be happy, and you'll enjoy, and that's it. But if you worship Krishna, you may have as that verse says, akama sarva kamo va moksha kamo darati, that you may have so many desire, no desire looking for liberation. But if you approach Krishna, there's an opportunity where you'll get purified, and you'll realize that maybe I'm not asking the right thing here, So, or you'll experience a higher taste, and that higher taste, you'll look back and think, just like Dhruva Maharaj. Dhruva Maharaj is perceived to be a Sakama devotee, a materialistic devotee. He wanted a kingdom greater than than Lord Brahma to avenge the insult that his father and Suruchi had, done upon him. But when he saw Krishna, then he realized, and he said, I was looking for broken glass. Now I found a real diamond. So a devotee in that way, he'll recognize that maybe I'm being foolish here. What am I praying for? I'm praying to be entangled in this material world. So that's quite a difference. There's a story also of Sanatan Goswami and the touchstone. The men came, and Sanatan said, yeah, there's something there, you can pick it up. So the man was happy. He had a touchstone that would turn metal into gold, but he realized, why is it in the dumpster? Why is it? There must be something. This person's tricking. He tricked me. He gave me this, but there's something better he has. So he went back, and Sanatana Goswami said, "Then throw this away, and I'll give you the better." He gave him the Maha Mantra. So, that what will happen if you associate with devotees who are, properly situated, or if you approach Krishna, then there'll be that possibility of purification. But the demigods, you won't. But one time, Achyutananda asked Prabhupada, what is better, the Christians or those who worship the demigods? And Prabhupada said, actually, the demigods worshippers are better because they're following Vedic culture. And within that worship, there's always Vishnu. There's Shiva, Vishnu, and sometimes Brahma, sometimes, Indra, the different. But Vishnu is always included in their worship. And because they're worshipping Vishnu, eventually they'll become purified. And because they're following the process of Vedic culture, eventually they'll become purified. So we don't necessarily discourage, because at least there's an acknowledgement that someone is greater than me. It's not like I'm the controller of everything, which is more like the demoniac mentality. It's all centered on me, and if I do things, it's all because of me. But then there's acknowledgement that I may be trying the best I can, but unless I get some blessing, it won't be successful. So at least if you pray to demigod, there's acknowledgement that there's something superior than yourself. So there's an opening there. And then from that acknowledgement, then you might say, well, okay, then, just like the Yamadutas with Ajamil, they went back to Yamaraj and said, hey, we were picking up this fellow here, Ajamil, but these Vishnu Dutas came, and we thought you were supreme, but obviously they have more powerful than you because they stopped us. So they started inquiring, and then Yamaraj had to explain that, yeah, I've got some power, but actually above me is Krishna. So sometimes through that association, through the process, one is worshiping the demigod, but he might start wondering, okay, well, who's Shiva, who's Vishnu, who's all? There's several people that I'm offering. Who's the best of all of them? And then he may come to the conclusion that Krishna is the best of all, and then he'll start, focusing more on Krishna, and like that. So I don't know if it answers. Yes.
So in this verse, it talked about people who come to God, the distressed, the people who are looking for wealth, the inquisitive, and one who's searching for the absolute truth. The
curious, curious.
Yeah. So those who are searching for the truth or the absolute truth, they're still considered, that's a material motivation, or is that still, they're on the level of pure devotion?
Well, they're not on the level of pure devotion. They're looking for knowledge, but often that knowledge leads them to impersonalism. The Brahma Jyoti, that we're all God, we're all one, and they're content with that. And we see a lot of people practicing yoga. They have some kind of spiritual thing, and they may be chanting mantras and doing different things. But there's a fundamental difference between the Vaishnava and all these other groups. The fundamental principle is there's no surrender. Right. That they're still the people in charge. They've just changed their modem of enjoyment to maybe a more mode of goodness platform, and somewhat spiritual, but it's still I'm the enjoyer. They're still in the center of the activity, and it's all relates to how they're feeling about it. I used to drink beer okay, I got tired of drinking and enjoying that, so now I'm doing yoga and I'm enjoying this, and this is my means of enjoyment, but I'm still want to be the enjoyer. But a Vaishnava has a different mindset where he wants to surrender to Krishna, and then he becomes the servant of Krishna, where, okay, it's you're the the call is on you. You're the one who's going to tell me what I should be doing. And if I enjoy it or I don't enjoy it, that's secondary. If I'm feeling bliss or I'm not feeling bliss, that I don't particularly care, because I know that I'm serving you. And you're the cause of everything. You're Nakarana Karanam. So, just, what I'm seemingly perceiving is irrelevant, because, my desire is to see that Krishna is pleased. And if I'm doing something that I know is pleasing to Krishna, then fine. And if there's seemingly some positive or negative result from that, it's irrelevant. So that's. But those who come for knowledge, usually they're coming. It's a speculative thing. They're analyzing things, and and it's still based upon them, what they perceive to be. Okay, this is what I'm prepared to accept. And that's why that. Bhakti is not gyan. Although we do use gyan, in the beginning, we convince people they're not the body. There's a lot of suffering in the material world and all that. But there's a certain time, if you get stuck too much on gyan, then you won't be able to enter into bhakti, because then you'll start thinking, well, how can Ganesh have an elephant head? Like recently, I was asking a devotee about this, that we read in the Bhagavatam how. Maharaj Parikshit, he's cursed, and he's on the banks of the Ganges, and Sukadev Goswami heard from his father Srila Vyasadeva, and then he goes on the banks of the Ganges and he speaks the Bhagavatam, and Sutta Goswami is there, and then later on he goes to Naimisharanya and he speaks the Srimad Bhagavatam. But he's only speaking the Srimad Bhagavatam because his father, Maharshan, is killed by Balaram. You following all this? But Balaram left the battle of Kurukshetra. He didn't take part in the battle of Kurukshetra because he didn't want to go against his brother Krishna. So he goes on pilgrimage while the battle of Kurukshetra is starting. And he only comes back when Bhima is fighting with Duryodhana. And that's when Bhima breaks Duryodhana's ties. But while Balaram is going around, he kills Ramaharshan. He goes to Naimisharanya, and Ramaharshan doesn't stand up. And seeing that Ramaharshan is actually from a Sudra, side, is a Brahminical but a Sudra side, so he kills him, and the Brahmins are all upset, and they say, we've given a benediction to Ramaharshan, how you could kill him. And Balaram said, okay, I'll settle it. The son is like the father, so let's put Sutta Goswami there. But that's taking place way before Maharaj Parikshit being cursed. Because Maharaj Parikshit, of course, it's after the battle of Kurukshetra. It's after, him, managing for a while. He was a king for a while, and then later he was cursed when he was a king. So that's much later. But Balaram killing Ramaharshan is much earlier. So there's no chronological, relation there. Of course, the devotee said, there are many things like that in the Bhagavatam. But if you follow logic, that might trip you. That might throw you off and say, well, that makes no sense. And if you start analyzing things, and many things like that you'll find that is questionable. So it may interfere into your bhakti, if you stay too long. And we've seen devotees very, very smart, analyzing, knowing the scriptures, but at one point they're so stuck on the gyan that they lose sight of bhakti, and they become what we say over-intelligent. And it's like, oh no, I can't accept all this stuff, how can this happen, and how could that, and so forth and so on, and so those who come with a desire for knowledge is good, but there has to be an element of bhakti, and that bhakti is a surrendered attitude where one develops shraddha, faith, ado shraddha, tata sangha, sadhu bhajana kriya. There are different processes that are described. So bhakti is not necessarily gyan. And that conversation with Haridas Thakur, and they were discussing what causes bhakti, and Haridas Thakur, declared that bhakti comes on its own. There's no anga, that because you're pious or you're very austere or you're very religious or you're this or you're that, bhakti stands on its own. Then you can say, well, how do we get bhakti? So the answer is that's agyata sukriti. It's on, you can't trace it. Although one time they asked Prabhupada that in the Krishna book, Prabhupada, you say that the cowherd boys, after lifetimes of pious activity, they became associates of Krishna and became cowherd boys. So the devotee was asking, well, Prabhupada, we didn't perform any pious activity. We didn't, he said, I created the pious activities for you. I created the pious environment by which you took to Krishna consciousness. But the point being is that these four kinds of people are coming with some material desires, and even the one who's inquisitive, he can also be inquisitive in the sense that, how can I manipulate the material energy for my enjoyment, and how can I have God mixed in there where, and therefore, I'll be a good boy, and sometimes people who are religious, they're a little proud of that, they're not drunkards, they're not this, they're moral people, they're, kind of sattvic. And you get that also from the yoga groups sometimes, that they think, oh yeah, we're so moral here, we're so, pakka, we're so, but they're not inclined necessarily to Krishna. They're not inclined to surrender. So that makes it very difficult for them to, so, devotee is a different kind of thing, a different process.
He mentioned actually the demigod worship as that they've never got the ultimate goal.
Yeah. That's what I mean. It depends. I mean, you could say, listen, we've built this whole Ottawa city, and no one's been worshiping Krishna to accomplish this. So I mean, and Prabhupada acknowledged that, that New York City was in America was a very prosperous place. But then you have to define what you mean by accomplishing something, because material energy, you can do so much, but it's still a waste of time. It's still a big zero, because what have you acknowledged at the time of death? What have you really accomplished? It'll all be lost at the time of death. It's only there because you identify with the body, and therefore you think it's there, but it's only because you're in the body. Once you leave that body, all that you seemingly have accomplished is all gone, is all finished. And even we see, but we have to save the environment, not maybe for ourselves, but for our little children and so forth. Yeah, but you won't be there, right? So they acknowledge that they won't even be the beneficiary of these activities that they're trying to do, but then they move it on to their children. But that's the reality. But what have you really accomplished? Accomplishment means if you gain anything spiritual, that when you leave this world, you'll carry on in your next life. So that's only spiritual or devotional credit. If you've done anything spiritual, then you'll be able to carry it on in your next life. But if not, then it'll all be wasted. So that point is there. Then unless you worship Krishna, even to worship the demigods, you won't accomplish much, because they can't give spiritual benediction. They can only give material benediction.
So I've also said that with all their accomplishments, the death rate is still 100%.
yeah, the death rate is still 100%. Yeah, although they're trying hard to create immortality, but it's amazing how it's like Krishna, Arjuna in the Gita. He's wondering why I'm bowing down, but why everyone else is now bowing down to Krishna. And we have that same mindset, They look at us that we're bowing down to Krishna, and they think, wow, these people are strange. And we think, wow, they're strange. How come they're not bowing down to Krishna? We take so much pleasure in bowing down and worshiping Krishna. We enjoy doing that. And for them, it's like such a strange thing to be doing, And that's what Krishna also says in the Gita, that for the sage, what is daytime is night for the materialist, and what is night for the sage is daytime. We see things quite opposite of what they're so convinced that they'll solve all the problems in the environment, and they'll do this, and and we know they're just wasting their time, because it's all based on lust and greed. It has nothing really to do with the soul. They'll never accomplish. They're pushing with the environment and LED lights, electric vehicles, and this and that. But ultimately, why do you even need the vehicle? Well, I need to go and gratify my senses, So they're just trying to change the means, but the desire is always there to do the same activity, to do the same thing, you know. And therefore, they can't solve the problem. The only way to solve any problem is to become Krishna conscious, because that's when you'll be able to convert lust into love and go back to your original position as a servant of Krishna. But it's very difficult to convince them. You know, they're so stubborn in their mindset, and they have so many, toys to play around to convince them. So what to do? But we have to feel ourselves grateful that somehow we were able to connect to Krishna consciousness, and there may be so many people out there who are not connecting, and you may sometimes think, wow, no one's taking to this Krishna consciousness, must be something wrong. But then you can take it and say, wow, I'm so fortunate that I'm taking to it. And like Prabhupada said, when you're selling good diamonds, not many buyers, not many people are prepared to buy the real diamond. So we have to see ourselves very fortunate. We have to try to make others fortunate. But if not, then at least we're going back to Godhead. So we're rowing our way back to Krishna. And if anyone wants to get in the boat, fine. If not, well, what can we do? So I'll stop here, and unless there's any questions. Okay, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.